Three UK, the mobile network operator known for offering unlimited mobile data tariffs, as well as having slightly bizarre marketing campaigns, has joined the 2100 MHz 3G to 4G spectrum refarming train that Vodafone and O2 have also been working significantly on, as I've covered in previous videos. So on a standard site without refarming, they have three 3G carriers and up to 20 megahertz of 4G paired spectrum, 15 megahertz of band 3, so 1800 megahertz, and 5 megahertz paired of 800 megahertz, which is band 20. And actually, on quite a lot of 3 sites that have 4G, they do have both of the 4G bands. Band 3 for the sort of mainstream capacity demands and data traffic, and the 800 megahertz for the more widespread and indoor coverage. However, compared to their competitors, especially EE and Vodafone, this 20 megahertz of 4G is comparatively not all that much 4G spectrum, and in fact EE's base 4G level for many years now has been 20 megahertz, let alone all the other band 7 and extra band 3 that they're now putting onto sites, which can bring them up to 70 megahertz of paired bandwidth. And like I said, I mean, Vodafone is also deploying a colossal amount of 4G spectrum into numerous urban areas now, with a base layer of 25 megahertz and then with band 7 and so on top of that. Now, the reason that 3 hasn't needed quite so much spectrum is because they have comparatively very few customers compared especially to EE and O2, but also to an extent also to Vodafone, who has many more customers. 3's problem though is not the number of customers they have, but the amount of traffic they all produce because of the unlimited and relatively low cost high data tariffs. So all in all, they could do with some more 4G spectrum, and the only mainstream supported 4G frequency that they have the ability to deploy onto is band 1, so 2100 megahertz. In other words, shifting some of that 2100 megahertz spectrum from 3G onto 4G. And like I say, luckily 3 has such a relatively large chunk of 2100 megahertz spectrum, which runs usually the 3 carriers on UARFCN of 10564, 10588 and 10612. When a site gets refarmed from the 2100 MHz 3G to 4G, the latter 2 3G carriers are the ones that get replaced with the 4G carrier. So 10588 and 10612 then become EARFCN of 99, and the bottom 3G carrier remains as it is as 10564. It is a very gauzy move doing this, because clearly that 10564 carrier, single 3G carrier, is going to have to be carrying all the circuit switched voice traffic, as well as the traffic from devices which don't support 4G, which includes a lot of, say, mobile broadband dongles, which 3 was very popular for offering. So it is a massive step to have all of your legacy traffic going through a single carrier, because as we saw when Vodafone and O2 were refarming their 2100 onto 4G, then they made 2 3G carriers on 900, but then they also have additional capacity in the form of 2G on 900 megahertz as well. So it is really big step to shift down to 1 3G carrier in especially the dense urban areas with which these 2100 megahertz 4G masts exist in currently. In terms of the vendor hardware they are using for 4G 2100, it appears to be using the Samsung LTE hardware that they use for their 1800 MHz and 800 MHz 4G. The equipment they use for 3G, which is a Nokia WCDMA only flexi stack, does not support 4G operation. So, in other words, they do have to fit new Samsung modules in order to do the 4G 2100, while also, I think, keeping the Nokia Flexi to do the 3G 2100 as part of MBNL, which is why doing 2100 MHz 4G for either EE or 3 becomes quite complicated because of their 3G only shared More and Flexi stack. In time, what we'll probably see is each operator then just becoming a fully passive share where they only share the mast structure, they don't share any of the equipment in it, because clearly that leads to complexities like this with different vendor support. Having Vodafone, O2 and now 3 all having refarmed at least part of their 2100 MHz to 4G, if not all of it in the case of Vodafone and O2 on some sites, and let's face it, nearly all of it in 3's case, that just leaves EE, who have 20 MHz paired of 2100 MHz spectrum, which can run up to 4 3G carriers. However, unlike 3, who usually run all 3 of the 3G carriers they can do, EE typically only runs 2 out of the 4 on their sites. So, I mean, that seems like an ideal opportunity to run 4G 2100 MHz. However, doing that is very complicated for the reasons that I've just alluded to with regards to the 3G only capabilities of the existing Flexi stack, and therefore new equipment will be fitted to the site. And I think for the time being it's more cost effective to refarm more of the 1800 MHz spectrum to 4G in EE's case than it is to deploy new modules in order to do 2100 MHz 4G. Thanks for watching. Perhaps I hope that EE might do a bit of 2100 refarm before the end of this year so that we can have all 4 networks doing it. Although, like I say, I don't think it's necessarily all that likely that it will happen. And this provides a significant capacity upgrade for 3. 50% increase in 4G bandwidth is not anything to really be sniffed at.